Thank you for introducing me and for inviting me to be here and for including the baby's voice when we're talking about leaving nobody behind. So we're going to talk about the Experience study, which is my PhD. Okay, so the Experience study rests on three core principles, which are each informed by decades of research and theory. The first is that brain growth and development are shaped by early life experiences. The second is that infants experience their world through a complex system of relationships. And third, infants communicate their thoughts, feelings, and experiences through their behaviours, cues, and states of alertness. And these principles are particularly evident in the NICU, where every experience, both positive or negative, shapes the developing brain. So neonatal intensive care is essential for survival, and our models of care continue to evolve with a shared commitment to improving outcomes. Yet despite these advances, the NICU remains unlike any other environment for a newborn baby. And hospitalisation in the newborn period shapes how infants perceive their world and form their earliest relationships. And it's within this context that my study emerges, which is to understand the NICU not through a clinical lens, but through the eyes of the infants themselves, centering their voice, so that we may shape care that truly responds to their experience. So the Experience study aim, as we've talked about, is to understand the infant's lived experience of hospitalisation in neonatal intensive care. So to begin with, I reviewed the existing literature to understand what we already knew of the infant's experience. And this published paper draws on 23 studies. And what really became clear is that their experience is explored predominantly through quantitative methods, with a strong reliance on measurable outcomes as proxies for how an infant's experience might be felt or processed. And this links into what Kelly's just talked about. So whilst that work is essential, it became clear that we need to try to understand neonatal care through a different lens, so that we can actually understand how it's lived and processed. So that gap drew me towards qualitative research, which are approaches concerned with meaning, context, and lived experience. And I began to consider whether these methodologies might give that different lens, not in place of quantitative data, but alongside it. And so I was introduced to phenomenology. Phenomenology is a qualitative approach that's concerned with lived experience, with understanding what an experience is like from the perspective of those who live it. Rather than explaining or measuring phenomena, it asks a different kind of question. How is the experience perceived, felt, and embodied? How is it made meaningful? So importantly, the aim is not to catalogue individual differences, but to attend to what is shared, to the underlying fundamental human condition. And for me, this offered a way of thinking about how infants in the NICU and it aligns also with my clinical intuition that experience matters, even when it cannot be spoken. So if you just look at some of these really powerful pictures of babies that are clearly communicating their thoughts and experiences to us by using their behaviour as a way of understanding experience, I developed a novel methodology to address the study aims. We called this methodology 360-degree phenomenology. So 360-degree phenomenology uses a mix of data collection methods designed to get as close as possible to the baby's experience. I started by focusing on the infants themselves, spending time at their bedside, observing their everyday experiences, immersing myself in their world, noticing what they see, hear, and feel. I watched how they interacted and connected with their caregivers and took in the emotional and atmosphere surrounding them, thinking what it might feel like and be like from the infant's perspective. For the times when I couldn't be there, I invited parents and staff to keep bedside diaries. And I also used the Newborn Behavioural Observation System, or the MBO, which is a relationship building tool to allow me direct interaction with the infants in the study, to gain deeper insight into their behaviours and their communicative strategies. And finally, to triangulate all the infant data, I conducted semi-structured interviews with parents and staff. asking them to put themselves in the infant's shoes and articulate what these experiences might feel like from the baby's perspective. The study took place in a quaternary NICU in Victoria, and I recruited term infants with an expected hospital stay of more than 7 days. Infants were excluded if they required cardiac surgery in the newborn period, purely for pragmatic reasons, because those babies are co-managed between different departments, and if the infant was on a palliative care pathway. I observed the infant's experiences for the duration of their hospital admission, or for a maximum of 12 weeks. Because this was an in-depth qualitative study, we were guided by the principle of information power, prioritising rich, relevant data rather than large participant numbers. So on that basis, we enrolled 7 infants and 37 of their adult caregivers into the Experience study. This involved over 100 hours of direct infant observation, 17 diaries, and 11 formal MBO sessions. I also conducted 40 semi-structured interviews with adult caregivers, with parents invited to participate in 2 interviews if possible across the study period. The data was then analysed using the 6 steps of Braun and Clark's thematic analysis, which is a well-documented way of analysing qualitative data. I organised the findings into 3 main results papers. The first gives an overview of the infant's experience across 3 interconnected domains: physical, emotional, and relational. And then papers 2 and 3 look more closely at the infant's relational world, meaning all of their interactions, connections, and relationships that shape how they experience life. As I've just outlined, the findings illuminate the infant's experience in NICU across 3 deeply interconnected domains: physical, emotional, and relational. These domains don't operate independently. Instead, they continuously shape and influence one another. For example, during a clinical procedure, the infant's body is physically touched, creating a sensory experience of pain. That may then evoke distress, and at the same time, the relational context of that moment, who is present, how they respond, and how interactions unfold, shapes how the infant feels in that moment. Hence, the relational domain acts as the anchor of experience. It's through connection with healthcare professionals and relationships with their parents that other aspects of the NICU experience are mediated, regulated, and given meaning for the infant. So I'm now going to briefly take you through these domains of experience. Along the way, I'll share examples of infants' behaviours and include quotes from parents and clinicians to illustrate how I interpreted the data and worked through the analysis in an iterative way. This work, similar to what Kelly's has discussed, is deeply emotive. It's not a critique of care, but it's rather an opportunity for us all to reflect and to learn together. So, my physical world explores the infant's physical surroundings and how these shape their early experiences. This includes not only the environment, but also their sensory experience and everything that's done to their bodies as part of their care. There's an inherent tension within the NICU. On one hand, it's the ultimate safe space. It's a place where a child's life is saved. But at the same time, it can be scary, unknown, foreign, even hostile. Words used by adult caregivers to describe the infant's environment. Infants experience sensory overwhelm and ongoing commotion. People, medical equipment, and the sounds of care surround them and touch them, often in ways that can be intense and unfamiliar, other words given by adults in the study. This leads directly into the sub-theme of all these hard things, all the procedures, interventions, and handling that are done to them. It's about capturing the reality of what infants physically endure in the NICU and how it shapes their early experience of the world, and therefore the impact these experiences may have. So I'm just going to read you some of these. The monitor is alarming, so too is the ventilator. The suction equipment gurgles as it's passed down the breathing tube. He is rendered silent by the breathing tube, but his posture, his frown, his colour, all portray his feelings. When we first came and saw him, he was just needles and tubes everywhere. He was so new in the world, and to have had so much done to him. It's so intrusive, it's just awful. We now turn to the emotional world, which captures the emotional roller coaster experienced by the infant. There were moments of peace and rest, times when they could just be undisturbed and secure. I also witnessed interactions that brought happiness and joy, moments like skin to skin, cuddling, story time, and singing. During these interactions, infants were relaxed, alert, and engaged with their adult caregivers, sharing eye contact, vocalizations, and showing a sense of curiosity, eager to learn about the social world around them. So from one of the MBO sessions, as she locked eyes with me, following my face and my voice, we could see her eagerness to connect, her response to the red ball and rattle, which are two pieces of equipment we use in the session, so a similar keenness to explore her world. Alongside moments of joy and curiosity, infants in the NICU also experience anxiety and fear. Clinical procedures, the handling that they require, and the presence of many unfamiliar faces and hands can be overwhelming. There's bright lights, loud noises, and sudden movements can contribute to a sense of uncertainty and stress. In these moments, infants may startle, cry, or become tense, behaviours that clearly signal their discomfort. These responses are then interpreted and described by adult caregivers as expressions of fear or anxiety. Her arms are contained within the blanket, but she's kicking and arching her back. Her heart and breathing rate have risen steadily since the procedure began. The monitor sounds its alarm. She changes colour, becoming mottled around the mouth. Her legs stiffen again, extending outwards. As the tube is inserted into her nose, she cries out, and then her entire body goes limp. Separation from their parents is one of the hardest experiences for infants in NICU. Being apart from the person who provides them with safety, love, and comfort can leave a baby feeling lonely and vulnerable. Even when cared for by kind and attentive staff, the absence of a parent is deeply felt, shaping the baby's emotional world in profound ways. I think it must be awful to be alone, to be lonely and by yourself in this place. So now we turn our attention to the infants' relationships and how these shape their experiences of neonatal care. The focus of the second published paper is the infant-parent relationship, and the stage on which this relationship unfolds is complex. It's shaped, as I've just mentioned, by separation and compounded by an altered parenting role and diminished parental confidence, topics which were discussed at length in interview. Moments of uncertainty and missed opportunities for connection are common, influenced not only by medical fragility, but also by the physical environment, medical equipment, medications that alter how infants can communicate with us, and at times hospital policies and cultural norms that limit opportunities for closeness. I want to be able to, just pick her up, but just to pick her up and comfort her with all the tubes and everything, that is obviously really difficult. Then they leave. Then the nursing staff would pick up the baton for the subsequent, what would it be, say 16 hours potentially, from when mum and dad leave to when they return the next morning. They try to continue, but they will never be able to do the same job as her parents. I always found leaving him at night was the hardest part, putting him down, knowing I'm not going to be here through the night for you. But despite these hardships, there are also powerful moments of meeting and connection, times when infants and parents come together. In these moments, infants are not just surviving, but they're thriving within the NICU environment. Sarah lies in her cot as her parents prepare to take her 7-week photos. The space is calm, quiet. Her parents speak to her in animated tones, smiling and adjusting her blanket. Sarah is awake and alert, her eyes wide and tracking between their faces. She lifts her eyebrows and opens her mouth slightly, her gaze steady and responsive. I didn't like being undressed today, Daddy. I got upset and started to fuss. But you spoke to me softly and held my hands close to my chest. With your calm voice and gentle touch, I was able to settle. And finally, paper 3 explores the infant-clinician relationship. The NICU operates at the intersection of two essential but at times competing goals, the preservation of life and the promotion of optimal infant development. Care is understandably centred on the infant's physical health. However, this focus can inadvertently limit attention to the infant's emotional safety and their early relational health. In this first sub-theme, the complexity of relational dynamics, I illuminate how each individual infant is exposed to many clinicians throughout their NICU journey, and this brings inconsistencies in approach within and across disciplines. The interactions varied in frequency and focus, voices differ in tone and volume, and handling varies in intention. From the infant's perspective, there's a constant shift in landscape of engagement, care, and attention. All these unfamiliar faces and hands touching you, like lots of people have handled him over the last week. All these different nurses, day and night, night and day. That must be really hard for him. We must also intentionally consider the infant's personhood, their identity, and their presence within the relational space. Infants are active participants in interactions. Their cues, behaviours, and expressions make meaningful contributions to the relational exchange. I observed moments of attunement and intimacy, shared gaze, reciprocal body language, and gentle verbal and non-verbal communication between babies and staff. These interactions can have a meaningful impact, shaping the infant's emerging sense of self, safety, and regulation. And this is shown here. He's in a quiet, alert state as the doctor enters the room. She approaches him, speaking softly. In response to the sound, Henry stills, listening and locating her voice. He turns his head towards her. A greeting is exchanged, brief but intentional. The doctor extends a finger. Henry reaches and takes hold. But in contrast to moments of synchrony and attunement, there were also times when infants' cues were overlooked, when care was delivered to rather than with the infant. In some interactions, babies were referred to by their condition or bed number rather than by their name as conversations took place around them. Tasks were carried out with great technical skill, but sometimes without eye contact, comforting touch, or words directed to the infant. And during these times, the infant can become peripheral to the interaction, the necessary site of care, but not an active participant in it. And these moments remind us that even within the demands of critical care, connection is central to how an infant experiences the care we provide. As the team prepare to leave, a passing concern about jaundice is raised. Without pause or warning, Charlie's blankets are pulled back to assess his skin tone. His reaction's immediate. Startled from sleep, he extends his arms and legs in a rapid, disorganised motion. Signs of physiological distress follow. His heart rate increases, breathing becomes erratic, and his face flushes. He turns sharply to the right, tugging at his endotracheal tube. People would do their jobs, but not necessarily talk to him. Notice him as a little person to talk to. The baby is in the middle of it all and often forgotten. Finally, healthcare workers describe systemic pressures, emotional demands, limited training in infant mental health, and uncertainty about their role in supporting this as real barriers to providing holistic care, ultimately impacting the infant-clinician relationship. I guess people are putting all their energy into their ABCs and keeping babies alive, that the other stuff is seen. I don't know, maybe there's just no capacity for it. I think it's a really important part of all of our jobs to be thinking about her experience and doing your best within your role to support that. So overall, the infant's NICU experience is complex and demanding. It's shaped by intertwined physical, emotional, and relational dimensions. Physically, infants were exposed to life-saving care, but also to pain, discomfort, and sensory overload. Moments of togetherness, as observed during skin-to-skin, brought a sense of calm. Emotionally, their behaviours reflected both stress and vulnerability, as well as moments of regulation and emerging capacities for engagement. Relationally, connection with caregivers through touch, voice, and attuned presence consistently emerged as a protective and organising force. So as I've just outlined, infants experience the NICU as demanding and complex. Their experience requires continual adaptation to sensory, procedural, and relational challenges. Across the data, their behaviours consistently expressed how they were physically feeling, emotionally coping, and relationally responding to both the environment and the people around them. These findings affirm that infants in the NICU are not passive recipients of care, but active meaning-making participants with a subjective experience, calling us to engage with and reflect on that experience. Importantly, the presence, attunement, and quality of connection offered by parents and clinicians shaped how infants navigated these demands and their capacity to cope. And by interpreting infants' expressions as meaningful communication, this study demonstrates how the infant's voice can and should inform care. So, having shared what I've learned about the infant's experience, the next question becomes, what does this mean for neonatal care? The findings are not merely descriptive, they have clear practical significance, and they invite us to reconsider how we recognise and respond to infant cues, how we support the parent-infant relationship, and how we as healthcare professionals see and connect with the infants in our care. Whilst the work focuses on the infants, the findings make clear that infant experience cannot be understood in isolation. Just as physical, emotional, and relational domains of experience are interconnected, so too is the context in which they unfold. Infants' experiences are shaped through ongoing interactions and the quality of connection with the adults around them, whose presence, attunement, and actions influence moment-to-moment care. Taken together, these findings highlight the power of connection as a unifying and protective force. This perspective not only deepens our understanding of the infant's experience in NICU, but also brings into view the lived realities of parents and staff. Connection cannot flourish unless we attend to each person's life world, creating space to truly listen, understand, and respond. And whilst I've outlined the many disruptions within the NICU that can challenge this model, I also hope I've illuminated the moments of meeting and connection and the profound difference they made. And it's this understanding that I offer as guidance for shaping the next phase of neonatal care, care grounded in connection. And the diagram that you can see here, it represents a conceptual framework, an idea grounded in experience and evidence, but not yet tested. So the next phase of my research career, therefore, involves working directly with infants, parents, and staff to co-design a model of connection-based care, remaining faithful to the qualitative methodologies that I've come to know and love, ensuring that the voices of those who matter most are placed at the centre of the work, to ultimately, I hope, improve outcomes for all. So in conclusion, early experiences matter. To provide truly responsive care, we must centre the infant's voice and recognise their personhood. Infants aren't passive recipients of care, they're communicating, experiencing human beings. When we listen, care becomes more relational, more connected, and more meaningful. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the babies, their parents, and the staff in the Experience study. Their bravery and their honesty has really was truly humbling, and I'm greatly indebted to everything that they've taught me, and hopefully we can now go on to teach other people to listen to the baby's voice and centre the baby's voice. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. That was an extraordinary talk. I've heard you speak of some of this before, but congratulations on your PhD, and it's such important work. I was going to ask exactly that, the what's next piece. Tell me about what that implementation framework looks like and how you are going to test and measure its effectiveness.
So I appreciate that just rolling out a whole new model of care is not easy. So the first thing we're actually starting with is identifying, using a small wins framework, small tangible changes that can happen today, that we can make changes such as always using the baby's name when you're interacting with them to give them a sense of personhood, to allow the parents to realise that they are more than a bundle of pathology, and to help to staff to understand the relational connection around the baby. So we're identifying small wins that we can put into at the coalface straight from the beginning. And then, as I've said, I would like to co-design a model of care based on connection, understanding what the real needs of all members of that relational triad, baby, parent, and staff. But that's going to take a bit of time. The Experience study gave us the baby's voice, and I also now trying to bring that into the literature and put it alongside what's published. There are clear enablers and barriers to connection-focused care, and underneath what lies behind those barriers, I think, is education. reflective supervision. I had the privilege to have a lot of reflective supervision in this PhD, and more psychological support for baby, for parent, and for staff, and bringing those. So we're looking at educational frameworks and trying to centre the voice of some of our colleagues who are already greatly experienced, our social workers, our allied health professionals. And I am hoping that this will be there's a call in the literature that we know that we can do better for babies and families. And I think often the staff are left behind. And I'm hopeful that we can combine a way where all members of that triad have a voice.
Thank you. That's so powerful. I mean, beware the quantitative people. But like in like where some of these interventions you say have been successfully implemented, has it translated to shorter lengths of stay or improved physiological parameters or lower inflammatory markers or any of those things which sometimes can be quite compelling for funders and whatever else who are concerned about length of stay and cost of care?
So skin to skin is internationally recognised. That is the baby's #1 home. If you look at this baby, that in this picture, this still photo here, that baby would rather be held on the chest of their parent. And there's huge literature out there that skin to skin reduces hospital stay, reduces infection risk, increases breastfeeding rates, improves mental health for parents, improves job satisfaction for staff. But there's barriers to providing care. Models of care which have been established and have been around for decades also look at similar outcomes and prove that there is benefits to relationally or infant-led care or family-centred care. But the application of those models are inconsistent. They're very resource intensive, and they're not equitable around the world, depending on where you're providing the care. So I think if we can perhaps work together and include all that fabulous work and move into the next era and think about connection, because connection makes sense to everyone.
Yeah. And I love the low-hanging fruit that you're talking about, like just using a baby's name. It seems like such a simple intervention, and you can't help but think that the nudge of saying, "So William, we're going to take a blood test," probably reframes that whole interaction.
Absolutely.
So I love that. And sorry, I'll stop talking and say, but translatable, because you've done it in term infants. Is the plan to look at it in preterm and see if you have the same experience, or would you just do a copy paste and say we would expect that the same sort of infant-centered care would have the same benefits, even though those babies are less mature?
If I could rewind the clock back, I wouldn't have just included term babies, but you know, what you're going to do.
Welcome to every PhD
welcome to every
anyone's
PhD.
ever done.
And there's a lot in the literature about preterm babies not having the same behavioural repertoire as a term baby. Humbly, I disagree. They have the same behavioural repertoire. It's just that it's a little bit more difficult to read. So that takes us back to education and understanding these cues. But I think ultimately I could do this experience in a perinatal centre with preterm babies, and a lot of the experiences that their term peers have had and I've documented would be very much the same for the preterm baby. And there's lots of literature to support how traumatic the environment is for preterm babies and the developing brain. So I think that although this is only the voice of term babies, it can be thought of as representing a hospitalised newborn.
Well, thank you so much, Nat. That was just a brilliant talk, a completely different perspective of a group that we definitely don't want to leave behind. So thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, I'm going to ask Cecilia, who I mentioned at the introduction. She's a maternal fetal medicine specialist. She's based in Townsville. She too has gone through the journey of her PhD, but her work now is quite different to that cool ivory tower of academia. And she's going to talk to us about Will You Come to Me? What about equity and access in perinatal care? So thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to the